Welcome to Savage Tales of Sword and Sorcery, episode number 1. My name is Bodhi Morningway, and for a very, very long time, I have always been intrigued with those stories that were essentially first begun by Robert E. Howard way back in the early 20th century. His amazing tales of a character that you may have heard of by the name of Conan. Although I didn't read the actual Robert E. Howard stories until much, much later, I, as a child, was always intrigued by the character that I saw in those early Marvel comics of Conan the Barbarian, and then the magazine of Savage Sword of Conan, which was under the helm of Roy Thomas, with incredible artists such as Alfredo Alcala, Neil Adams, Barry Windsor Smith, and of course the legendary John Buscema. These stories made such an immense impression on my youthful mind that they essentially had taken up residence in a sword-shaped area of my brain and have never ever left. For years, I've been trying to find a way to add my own little piece to those epic legends of sword and sorcery. And so I conceived of this platform. I began writing and writing. I am not even remotely close to being finished, but I thought that if I got some of it out there, that would encourage me to even greater levels, shall we say? So, that is what this is. This is a story of my own creation. Of course, with the greats that have come before inspiring me the entire way. So, let us begin the Savage Tales of Sword and Sorcery by me, Bodhi Morningway. Prologue. The moon had barely risen above the horizon, yet the craggy peaks and steep slopes of the dark iron mountains were already bathed in near pitch blackness. This particular range of mountains were some of the most mysterious and frightful in the known world, boasting impenetrable passes, sudden avalanches, and beasts as fearsome as they are rare. A demonic howl can be heard breaking through the silence of the jagged summits, but no creature can be seen. But if one happens to look closely, from a particular angle, a light, very dim and eerie, pinpricks through the almost substantial darkness. Were there anyone there to see it, the glow illuminates from a cavernous entrance that leads into an even more sinister lair, built into the very rock that surrounds it. If one were to listen very carefully at the entrance, one could hear the unmistakable sound of chanting. The chanting is in a language known to very, very few, and those that do know it guard its secrets with not only their own lives, but any life that they must sacrifice for its knowledge. An acrid smoke wafts through the winding corridors as the chanting increases at a steady pace. It is an ancient spell that has not been heard of on this world for several hundred years. Further inward, around a bend and down a slope, a vast archway opens into an even more enormous chamber, boasting a hollowed center that drops below farther than any eye can see. Around the outside of the immense hole is a precipitous landing that protrudes more than 20 feet out from the stony walls of the mountain citadel. There, on the far side, can be seen a figure cloaked in black robes. The figure is tall, unnaturally so, and lanky in an uncomfortable way to look upon. Grayish-white skin can be seen as the vast robes fall away from the arms during the somatic gestures necessary for such Stygian magics. The smoke from the cauldron swirls about as the darksome figure shouts out the final pieces of the ancient spell. The ghastly liquid from the cauldron bursts up as if it had a life of its own, only to stand seemingly petrified in a wall of liquid before the nebulous sorcerer. Soon an image begins to appear within the aqueous screen. The sorcerer looked upon a large, heavily muscled barbarian from the north, possibly Numenoria, a land of vast trackless fields, forests, and mountains. According to the dark sorcerer's spell, this man may be destined to oppose him in his quest to find the mythical Vault of Cortanus. The Vault of Cortanus was said to contain unimaginable secrets of magic, the likes of which the world has not seen for many ages. According to the mythology, the vault had 9 gates within it that could only be opened by a key created for that very lock. None of the 9 keys have been seen for so long that the very knowledge of them have dropped from the realm of human memory, and the vault itself is thought of as nothing more than a legend of ages past. So too did the dark sorcerer think of the legends, until he discovered an ancient grimoire that told of the vault as well as the keys in the greatest of detail. Unfortunately for the sorcerer, there was nothing about the location of any of the keys nor of the vault itself. But even that was not enough to convince this mysterious mystic of its validity. It was not until further on in the grimoire, when the spectral mage found a map of this very place in which he now stood, and on a whim decided to seek it out. No one could have been more surprised than he when he found that the fabled Bloodstone Citadel actually existed. This, then, in the mind of the Dark One, gave legitimacy to all else contained within the aged grimoire. If one could see into the mysterious figure's cowl, one might notice a slight twinge of apprehension in his ageless eyes. Shaking himself out of his reverie, the darksome sorcerer examined the scene before him. The barbarian had a formidability about him that was easy enough to gauge. In fact, it reminded the dark sorcerer of one who had opposed him in times long past. The barbarian's gait was one of confidence in his own abilities, and the rather large sword that was strapped at his side rested very comfortably under the palm of his hand as he rode his horse southward. In fact, the spectral sorcerer recognized the land as being only days away from the dark iron mountains which he now called home. However, this did not worry the eldritch phantom overmuch, as there was no way that the barbarian could know of the Bloodstone Citadel, nor of its location. But still, the sorcerer thought to himself, he should be wary of just such a thing occurring. The image of the barbarian slowly faded from sight, to be replaced with that of a lithe and curvy woman, wearing leather and furs similar to those of the barbarian, yet not as wild in appearance. The woman had dark hair and eyes that virtually shouted mischief. She was truly a sight to behold, and the sorcerer felt a slight pang for the humanity that he had lost long ago when looking upon this most striking woman. In the image that the sorcerer glimpsed, she seemed to be sneaking about a tower, and was obviously keeping to the shadows, not wanting to be seen. She quickly ducked away, as seconds later a soldier or guard of some sort entered into the vision. A few more moments passed, and she appeared once more out of the shadows, a thin smile playing upon her lips. Gracefully she ran, making no noise, in the opposite direction that the guard came. Rounding the tower, she stopped, looked around, then stopped as if to listen. A satisfied look came upon her rascally features. She pulled a thin rope from her pack. The rope had a grappling hook on the end of it. With practiced ease, the woman twirled the rope and threw it high up to the ledge of the tower, nearly 50 feet up, and almost immediately began to scale the rope, having the end tied about her supple waist to avoid both detection and possibly save her in case of a fall. This woman was a thief of some sort, and was obviously attempting to stealthily enter this tower. Just who the tower belonged to, or where it was not shown to the wizard. Yet he did know that she must be farther away from his current location than was the barbarian. Very well, thought the shadowy wizard to himself. There are 2 that could oppose me, if I do not eradicate them first. But just as the grim mystic started to turn from his liquid divination, a new image began to form. This time, the area was a vast jungle. All manner of birds could be heard in the background, as well as some simian-like creatures shouting their odious calls. The darksome sorcerer turned once more toward the wall of water, curious as to just what this image would tell him. There was an old trail, not at all well worn, in the image before him. The trail itself was almost completely overgrown with various tree roots and other vegetation, but one could still see pieces of the stone that once made up this obviously ancient pathway. Soon, a dark-skinned man appeared, also very fit, but without the sheer size of the barbarian he had glimpsed earlier. Nonetheless, this man too wore furs, but of tan color with black stripes. He carried a wickedly curved bow, as well as a small axe at his belt. The man's movements showed a practiced ease and grace that indicated that he was very much at home in whatever jungle this was. He seemed to be exploring this ancient trail, as he was far more alert than one who is used to treading along the same path. Then he suddenly stopped and whirled right toward the dark sorcerer, as if he was looking right at him. So quick were the man's movements that the sorcerer actually took an involuntary step backward. Then, astonishingly, this strange and intriguing black man began to move toward the sorcerer. This was impossible, thought the sorcerer to himself. There is no way that he could know that I am divining him. With a wave of his hand, the dark sorcerer ended his spell, and the wall of water then ceased showing any images and collapsed back into the massive cauldron that spawned it. The magic user turned away from the cauldron and began walking toward the center of the chamber where the massive pit yawned before him. He stood there, staring at it for what seemed an immeasurable amount of time without moving. In fact, there was very little to differentiate the sorcerer from a statue. Then, just as suddenly, he whirled from the pit and was immediately in full motion, heading out of the chamber and into one of the corridors. This passage led to a stair, also carved out of the very rock of the mountain, and seemingly just as ancient. The stairwell curved round and round, continuing down for a great distance, passing several levels indicated by landings and archways. Eventually, the dark sorcerer exited after what must have seemed to another as a great length of time. There he came to another chamber, lit by torches that illumined the area with a greenish, unnatural light. Before the sorcerer was a vast pool of black water, but this was no ordinary water. It was far more dense, murky, and had a malevolent scent that exuded from its caliginous depths. Once more the grim wizard spoke the spidery rhymes of magical verse, but this time it was not as lengthy nor animated as the previous spell. Soon the brackish water began to move, and up out of it rose a creature hideous in appearance. Eyes black as space were set in a nightmarish head of demonic countenance. A small nose-like structure topped a mouth that housed knife-like fangs protruding devilishly out of it. The creature stood nearly as tall as the towering sorcerer himself. Black, putrid water dripped off the fish-like scales of the monstrosity as it gazed towards its master who had summoned it from its sodden nether realms. The dark sorcerer spoke to it in a language that could only be described as completely incomprehensible to anyone of human form. The creature responded in kind, with obedience. It then turned towards the vast subterranean lake and let out a shrill alien shout. Soon, many ripples broke the surface of the briny lagoon. The monster raised its arms and shouted at its brethren, who now numbered many within the underground cavern. Satisfied, it turned back to the sorcerer, who said one more thing in the guttural, abysmal language. The guild abominations then dove back down into the dark waters to do the bidding of their mysterious lord. The enigmatical cloaked mage stood at the edge of the great brackish pool for a few moments, gazing out into something that only he could see. Seemingly satisfied, he left the underworld chamber and proceeded back up into the upper floors of the forgotten bloodstone citadel. Soon, one could hear once more the spidery chanting of eldritch words echoing into the night. Chapter 1. The Dread Keep. The day was very promising. The sky was clear, there was a warm breeze coming up from the south. The rapids of the jagged Fang River were now well behind him, and the peaks of the dark iron mountains before him. The barbarian's trek began over 2 weeks ago in the northern lands known as Numenoria, a vast and lawless place populated by several barbaric tribes that were almost constantly at war with one another, and no one would have it any other way. The land, although well forested, was a harsh and untamed wilderness filled with sudden dangers and even more sudden beauty. Auric had lived his entire life there, and prospered quite well. At a very young age he had become a warrior, and even played a pivotal part in his very first battle not long after turning 13 years of age. Auric had always been overly large and strong, often training in the forest by lifting both trees and large stones, perfecting his aim with the spear and throwing axe, excelling in sword practice as well as the battle axe, and training in the arts of wrestling and bare-handed combat. The Numenorians prided themselves on being warriors, one and all, and every tribe took to training their youth in the arts of battle. But Auric took to it even more than most, and soon became almost a legend amongst the northern tribes. As a youth, Auric had always been interested in hearing the stories of just what lay in the world beyond the jagged Fang River, which marked the very edge of Numenoria. While it was fairly rare for Numenorians to adventure far to the south, it was not unheard of, and there were 3 from Auric's own tribe who had done so. Whenever there were tales around the campfires, each of them would regale young Auric with the tales of incredible and vast cities around the Golden Gulf, that land far to the west of the known world. The lands of the Golden Gulf were teeming with thousands of people from all over the known world, and each of its great cities seemed to have its own flavor of mysterious towers of wizardry stretching toward the stars themselves as if to touch the very heavens to garner their secrets. Scantily clad, painted and perfumed ladies that offered you delights beyond imagining, and riches beyond anyone in Numenoria had ever seen, just ripe for the taking. But each of these incredible sights were equaled by the incredible danger that seemed to guard them with a wary eye. The great towers of magic always had some crazed sorcerer ruling over them, with mighty magics that could burn a man to a cinder or send denizens of hell to hunt down any would-be intruder. The beauty of the ladies would often be devious ploys to lift all your coin, or even lure you into a dark alley where bandits could rob you, perhaps even kill you. And those vast treasures that seemed so plentiful are well guarded by the greedy, lecherous lords that boast of their wealth. But none of those warnings were enough to stop Auric from eagerly awaiting the moment when he too could leave Numenoria so that he might walk amongst these sights, see these sorcerous towers, experience those beautiful perfumed women, and write his legend in the very annals of the world itself. Auric could not help but smile to himself as he breathed in the late morning air, expanding his greatly muscled chest as he stretched his massive arms. He was finally doing it. After all those years of planning and dreaming of this very moment, he would have taken this journey long ago were it not for the constant battles with the Red Wolf tribe. At one point, Auric's tribe, known as the Snow Panthers, and the Red Wolf tribe were very close, and even joined in blood when their chief had married the daughter of Auric's own aged chief. Things had gone quite well for a short time, but then, just as suddenly, the Red Wolf chief seemed to go completely mad and had slain his wife, claiming that it was she that was attempting to murder him, all in a great plot by the chief of the Snow Panthers to take over the Red Wolf tribe. Of course, anyone that knew the Snow Panther chief or his daughter could tell that this was all nonsense. But before anyone could really investigate the matter, Kirak, the crazed chief of the Red Wolf tribe, had begun the war against the Snow Panthers with a devastating attack that had killed their aging chief. But what Kirak had not counted on was Auric's own father, Konat, who was the war chief of the Snow Panthers and a very capable warrior. Konat immediately took control of the tribe, leading them to many victories. That war would last 5 years. Both sides were equally matched, and most battles ended without any clear winner. Both had magnificent warriors and excellent tactical knowledge. But as the years went on, and Auric grew further into adulthood, his vast strength and skill had swayed the battles to such a degree that the Red Wolf tribe could no longer hold their own against the superior strength of the Snow Panthers. Within the next year, the Red Wolf tribe was literally brought to its knees, with Auric's own father, the much-respected Conat, leading the attack that succeeded in putting down the raving mad Kirok. Auric had been instrumental in that battle as well, often being outnumbered 3-1, but never outmatched. In fact, such was Auric's ferocity that the powerful warriors of the Red Wolf tribe had actually become fearful of his might. Such a thing was almost unheard of in all the blood-drenched histories of the tribes of Numenoria. After the war with the Red Wolf tribe was won, there was a time of peace that washed over nearly all the southern half of Numenoria. Now was the time. Auric had gone to his father, who was now the sole and permanent chief of the Snow Panthers, and told him of his desire to leave Numenoria and explore the areas south of the Jagged Fang River. Auric's father seemed to be not at all surprised. In fact, he almost seemed to expect it. It was at this time that he regaled young Auric about his own adventures in the south of the world. Auric was shocked. He had no idea that his father had ever gone away from Numenoria. He had never said such a thing. But now, Auric listened to his father Conat with rapt attention as the stories and mead flowed for much of the night. Conat had told him about all that the other 3 tribesmen had mentioned around the campfires, and so much more. He told Auric of how he had infiltrated the albino tower of the mad sorcerer Nestro in the city of Carabel, as well as the story of how he had become a mercenary soldier in the armies of Afial under the rule of King Sumar. He spoke to Auric of the beauties of both flesh and treasure, and Auric drank it all in, listening to everything and even asking details of things they could not quite understand. And when the sun burst through the horizon, Conat gave his son one final hug and wished him all the luck in the known world, and told Auric that when he returned, he expected to be equally impressed by his son's tales of adventures in the south of the Jagged Fang River. Auric crossed over a tiny stream and proceeded up a slight incline, when he heard a booming noise off into the distance. Immediately, the barbarian's horse became skittish, as it seemed to detect something untoward of natural in the air. Auric, too, had a sense of profound unease wash over him. Only a moment later, something was amiss, and it must have something to do with that loud booming sound. Auric spurred his horse to move faster, cresting the small hilltop and seeing a column of black smoke creeping its way up into the sky from the very location the boom sounded from. Curiosity won its battle with fear inside the mighty barbarian, as it always does, and Auric forced his horse to move even faster now. He could not see just what it was that caused the black smoke or the booming noise, as the country here is very hilly and he was some distance away still. Several minutes had now passed, and Auric's eagerness to see just what had happened overcame any ideas he may have had to stealthily encroach upon the area. As the barbarian shot up yet another hill, he reined his horse in so tight that it neighed in protest. Before them was a keep built into the rocky wall of a much bigger hill. The entire side of the keep, as well as a large area before it, was black, as if someone had lit it on fire. This was the cause of the black smoke that trailed into the sky. All around the blasted keep lay the bodies of numerous soldiers. Warily, Auric tried to move forward, but his horse would have none of it. It reared up and almost tossed him. Dismounting the horse, Auric tied the spooked animal to one of the nearby trees that dotted the area and proceeded warily on foot. This felt wrong, he thought to himself. As he got closer, he could see that this had been a battle, very likely for the blackened keep itself, because it was not more than 100 yards before him. Most of the bodies near him seemed to have died from various slashing and piercing wounds. As Auric moved warily onward, a loud squawk suddenly sounded from right behind the mightily muscled barbarian. With the speed of a panther, Auric's broadsword flashed out of its sheath, ready to lay waste to whatever was foolish enough to attack the barbarian. But it was only a raven. However, that did not stop the tiny hairs at the base of Auric's neck from standing on end. He was being watched, but from where he could not see. Warily, Auric made his way closer to the keep. When he was but 40 yards out from the keep, he could see that the bodies of these soldiers, from both sides, seemed to have been blasted out from where they were, and are now little more than blackened and charred corpses. Auric shook his head in confusion. This made no sense. Why would somebody destroy their own people just to destroy their enemy? Was this keep that important? And then something grabbed Auric's leg. Looking down, Auric was horrified to see the charred skeletal arm of one of the burnt and blasted soldiers gripping his ankle. Then the ghastly head, with most of its flesh melted off, raised up in a horrifyingly grotesque visage. Auric was momentarily shocked into immobility, but the mighty barbarian quickly regained his senses and sent his sword arcing down to cleave the skull of the undead menace. But just then, numerous groaning noises sounded from everywhere around the barbarian as all the bodies of the dead soldiers began to move and shift and slowly rise up off the ground. Auric's eyes widened with the fear of knowledge. "Sorcery," he said to himself, as his eyes became like unto great saucers of white. The sense of unease that Auric had been feeling had now changed to full-fledged panic, and he headed for the keep, which he knew was his only chance against this legion of fiendish foemen. But several of the skeletal soldiers rose up hauntingly before him, the charred flesh still flaking off their reanimated limbs. But Auric was no whelp fresh to the battlefield, but rather he was a war-honed fighter feared throughout the north. These enchanted cadavers that blocked his way were nothing more than wheat stalks before the scythe, as with one mighty swing, the barbarian's sword sheared through the animated devils. The powerful sinews in his legs pumping for all they were worth, Auric virtually flew into the blackened keep, while behind him, much of the energized carcasses that were once soldiers regained their feet. The door to the dread keep was blasted inward, and was little more than a few planks of wood barely held together, but there was a rather large table nearby. Auric swung closed the shoddy remains of the door and hefted the huge table with an ease caused by desperation, and then slammed it into the already entering walking dead. The table smashed into the doorway with both a crash as well as a sickening splintering of bones as one of the undead minions was caught between the door and Auric's makeshift barrier. But the weight of the table, even though great, would not be enough, Auric thought to himself. He scanned the immediate area and found a large cupboard, as well as another table, a weapons rack, and numerous chairs. All these he used to further block the doorway until he was satisfied that there would be no chance for these glorified carrion to make their way through that entrance. With the savage pounding of many skeletal hands on the doorway behind him, Auric turned his attention to this mysterious keep, wondering all the while just how he was going to get himself out of this predicament. And that is where we shall stop it for this, the very first episode of Savage Tales of Sword and Sorcery. Once again, my name is Bodhi Morningway, and I hope very much that you enjoyed the first part of my story. Until next time, farewell, fellow adventurers.